The General Assembly, which has some bearing, quite a bit of bearing on education. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So Wade, you're going to be the moderator, and I'm just going to pipe in every now and then.
Sure. So since we have the benefit of having a federal member of Congress and then state legislatures here, there's some concepts and some problems here that we're going to discuss that require legislative solutions. And as you all know, we have a federal system of government, so there's different approaches to some of these problems. Some of these are going to be, in some ways, a heavier focus at the federal level, and in some ways there's going to be almost exclusively at the state level. So I'm going to start kind of talking through, and I'll start off with federal, and then we'll break it down into the more granular. And generally speaking, the state's going to have more power to address a lot of these problems. But we'll get the discussion going here, and it may be that if there's just a limited ability for the federal government to act, then Congressman Bishop can speak to that. And but before I go, I'll kind of reiterate again on these are the type of issues that are really difficult to get members of Congress to want to fight on because they're politically difficult to navigate depending on your ability to communicate the idea and defend it and explain it to people. And one of the things I've appreciated about Congressman Bishop, and I literally don't say it, I mean, people have known me for a long time, I'm very hesitant to, because I believe in holding every elected member of Congress and at every level of government accountable. And sometimes that means that these are people I really like, but you got to be sometimes tough on them. One of the things I like about Congressman Bishop and a few other members like Chip Roy, who's my former boss. I mean, I'm just saying that because he's my former boss. I'm being nice to him. But there's a few members that just always seem to be there. They're in the fight, and it's really hard to hold them accountable when they're just not that wrong. Now, that's not to say he's never wrong, but he's just always in the fight. Almost never wrong. Worst now. So I've really enjoyed understanding that there's a member and then at the staff level, some people that get it so we can collaborate and partner. And part of the problem is just finding someone to start talking about it. And once you show that you can do it and you can do it successfully and you can dodge all the attacks that will inevitably come your way, other members then feel emboldened to take action and start speaking out with it. And of course, this is one of the things we saw with critical race theory. They filed their bill, and shortly after, a whole bunch of Republicans started jumping on that bandwagon, and his office was one of the first to do it. And then, so thank you very much, sir, by the way. So we'll get into the first issue here, which is, this has been a hot topic in Florida, the Parental Notification Bill, HB 1557. And of course, a lot of this started off with what schools can't hide in terms of mental, emotional, or physical health issues, and schools can't hide education and health records. Those were not as controversial. What the left really keyed in on is the fact that schools can't have instruction on sexual orientation or gender identity in K-3 or in age-inappropriate manner. So immediately what the left said was, oh, you're saying you can't say gay. And so, the pushback to that was, of course, no. What we're saying is that if you are a gay educator or a straight educator, and a student comes up, for instance, and says, are you gay or straight? You can answer that question. But what you can't then do if they say, well, what does that mean? What does gay mean? The response is you need to go ask your parents. And so teachers saw this as because of everything we've learned this morning, as an inability to basically advance their agenda. So turning it over to you, and I'll kind of let you talk through this, one, your thoughts on the issue, and then two, is there a federal response on this? There's certainly a state response. We've seen it, but is there a federal response?
Thank you, Wade, and I'm delighted to have a chance to be here to see all you guys. And Sloan, I want to thank you for what you've done here. And you all have been going at this for a few hours. I want to take a minute before I answer your question to say, first of all, thank you for your kind words, Wade. But I want to sort of give an overall picture. It's my pleasure to sit here with the guys who have legislative experience. These guys are experienced legislators. I'm a newcomer. I was privileged to serve briefly with John in the State House, John Torbett, and he's been trying to deal with the unwieldy public education system in the House for a number of years and doing great stuff and carrying on a really difficult task. Ralph Hise, who I served with in the Senate, these guys have already done tremendous things. Ralph in the Senate has what is absolutely true. He has the heaviest portfolio of any senator, meaning he is called on by the Senate to to handle more complex tasks than any other member of the body. And so I'm still wet behind the ears, newcomer compared to these guys. I just ended up in that special election that we had in 2019 and ended up going to Washington, where it's a much bigger zoo than it is in Raleigh. And we unfortunately are in the minority, where our main task up there, Wade, is to throw sand in the gears as the lunatics try to steamroll us, and to communicate to the American people what's happening, using, unfortunately, very narrow means of communication, because all of corporate media has been consumed and dominated by the left. So we have that problem. And I think you're right. I don't even know what was your question, Wade? So I have those things on my mind, and I got some other things on my mind too. And you're a politician, never answer questions. I'm going to answer the damn questions.
So there's been, so we've already attempted to stop any federal funds from funding divisive concepts, and what we've seen in Florida is they've taken that a step further to extend that from not just the divisive concepts of CRT, but the divisive concepts of gender theory, et cetera, and to basically they stop teachers in K-3 from providing instruction on sexual or gender orientation.
Yep.
And so the question is there a federal response? What can we do through the Congress to address this? And of course, we know that there's a robust state response, which will.
And I know, and while that entered my mind to start introducing this in response to your question, is you're absolutely right. One of the things that we confront, or the realities we confront, is to the extent people are paying attention, Congress does get some attention, right? So it's a place from which hopefully you can communicate to people and share with them things that are going on. On the other hand, as conservatives, we know that the Constitution designed Congress to be a legislature of limited power, and we don't want. And one of the greatest dangers threatening the republic is that it expands without limitation, expands constantly, and nobody in the Uniparty seems to care, but some of us do care. So some things that you can do. I mean, so here's where we are. I think in the country is that you've got to take the multiple pieces and they got to work together effectively. And I think folks on the right, for a number of years until recently, have often developed sort of a passivity, angry as hell at Washington and other elected officials maybe, but to the point of just turning away from it and not being involved. And I think what we've seen, Sloan, with your activism, some of the folks who are in this room, James Lindsay, who's over there, who we've got some folks who are extraordinarily brilliant thinkers. Chris Rufo is another one who comes to mind, who have caused to bubble up. And what's really new is the availability of activism at the grassroots level that are ready to make things happen. Everything that I have done in relationship to critical race theory has built on that foundation. And frankly, I think the first thing we all need to recognize is that not one of us is terribly important individually. And you talked about stepping into this area. There was that Frank Luntz was running around Washington saying to Republicans, every Republican should stay 1,000 miles away from this critical race theory thing. And so I said, that's probably the thing to do, is to go get into it. So we did, and thankfully about Wade Miller's organization and Russ Vogt, who worked with him at the Center for Renewing America, they had been there as Russ had been OMB director to Donald Trump when Donald Trump came out with that brilliant executive order saying we're going to cut out this critical race theory crap out of federal agencies. Well, once the Trump administration was out of office, the proposal that we started working on and in fact introduced as the Stop CRT Act was we could do that. We could say, just as a matter of federal Congress's control over the federal bureaucracy, we're not going to allow critical race theory to be imposed on people, to be used through official sources, and that was the main part of the bill. But we also went one step further, and frankly, have some hesitancy about it. You'll understand why. We said, we're also going to say no federal funds are going to be expended on critical race theory, that kind of crap, around the country. And even when you take that step, you start recognizing, some of the big problems that we face is all the ways in which the federal government reaches its hands down into the work of John and Ralph and all the folks in their states and the localities. So but we've got to take the step we can, and then we have to be responsible enough to say, not all the job is mine to do. And I think the next part is what we're doing today. Thanks to great activists, moms and dads showing up. What has impelled the work we're doing in Washington? We have somebody from the FBI in front of us, or Chris Wray, or the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, and we can tear him a new one. And over the fact that they're using the counterterrorism division of the FBI to target and tag and scrutinize parents who are showing up at school board meetings, we have a robust fight that we can wage there because moms and dads have shown up in school boards all across North Carolina, all across the country. So I think it's extraordinarily important not to get up on anybody's pedestal about whatever office you're in, because it doesn't matter. You guys are the ones who are important. You guys are the ones who are important theorizing, James, and helping us understand what we're up against. In fact, the latest thing, James, is actually the productivity of geniuses like James Lindsay is something you guys have to, if you don't follow him, and I bet you all do, but you need to if you don't. New Discourses is his website, and he also has a mean Twitter game that's really almost as good as Wade's. Actually, I don't know who's, but James, we saw each other at a conference down in Florida not too long ago, and we were talking. James said, the next thing you guys should do, you should do like a resolution in Congress that calls out critical race theory for what it is. That it is the acquaintance to Marxism, cultural Marxism, is utterly plain, and that could be reduced to a resolution. You should offer that. So that's a fantastic idea. Could you help me get there? So before the weekend was out, I got a draft of it from James. It's a fantastic document. We've still been, as we drink from the fire hose about things we got to do in Washington, we've been working that through my legislative team, and we're going to introduce that. But that's what I mean. It is a seamlessly connected thing if we're going to be effective. And I think that's what conservative grassroots are coming to understand, have come to understand. And the pioneers among you, Sloan, others here who have stepped out in a big way to make those things happen, we all owe you a debt of gratitude. And I'm grateful, and as long as I'm doing this or whatever else I'm going to do, I want to make common cause with the Ralph Hises of the world, John Torbett, and with the Wade Millers and intellectual strongholds like James Lindsay, but every one of you. This is a social activity we must engage in together. The country's survival, that's what I've become convicted of. We've lost control of virtually every institution in the country. They've been co-opted and corrupted against the interests of ordinary Americans. We do have the resources and the resilience as Americans to change that, but it's going to require an extraordinary effort and commitment, and it's going to have to involve people most of all. It will never happen because of somebody running their mouth in Washington. So with that, I hope that's
So before we transition over to the state response here, one point I'd like to make is that the institutional right in DC basically sees issues like this as, we're in the minority, what's the point? And they forget that one of the biggest powers of a congressional seat is that it's a communications platform. So it is really hard to get booked onto Fox News to talk about an issue if you're a state rep. It's really hard, and you've really got to break through, and there's got to be some sort of news cycle. It's a lot easier if you're a member of Congress, especially if you're a member of Congress who's rabble-rousing and actually in the fight. And so a lot of the GOP that has the ability to go out there isn't, and they're just sitting on their hands. And so they're leaving this on the communication side, they're leaving a lot on the table, and they're basically leaving the states to fend for themselves, while the institutional left was all over the place on these issues. They will go on the attack mode. And so that's one thing to think through when you're thinking about your elected reps, whether it's Congressman Bishop or someone else, is are they using the communications platforms to their maximum benefit to help the states in their fight against the federal overreach. In this case, the answer is yes. Congressman Bishop does that quite a bit, but all too often that's not the case. So turning it over to you, Sloan, for the state response.
Well, I think one of the greatest spokesmen that we have here, and I'm very grateful to our Lieutenant Governor, Mark Robinson. We have Brian Lebecki here, who's the Chief of Staff, and I mean, I'm just theorizing. Sometimes when you say truth, it must scare the hell out of you guys, right? When your leader is speaking the truth, because lately the truth about this stuff, like the transgender movement, that it's evil. It takes a leader like Mark Robinson and others to say that, but the rest of us, even me, I mean, because I'll say it. I'll say it. I'm cool. But when I hear Mark, I'm like, so it must be, difficult for all of us to have one man who's speaking this, etc., and then the legislation, which I guess you don't have control over, doesn't catch up. How can you explain that lag between setting these cultural fires, right, and then coming back behind it and legislating? Do you lobby the General Assembly for some of your initiatives?
Yeah, and again, Brian Lebecki from the Lieutenant Governor's office, and just briefly, would have been great if he was here, and we just had a conflict, so you're stuck with me, and I know that's
We can be meaner to you, though. We can be mean to you, though.
That's right, you can be meaner to me. But no, and I mean, to answer your question, it is, we do work with the General Assembly a lot. In fact, with these two gentlemen right here, more often than not. And it's part of the challenge with the legislation. And I don't know how much of this you may have already talked about today, but part of the problem with legislating is that you've got some of these things that are kind of embedded, like in our First Amendment jurisprudence, where you're telling teachers what they can teach and what they can't teach, right, is what we always get as that pushback. And crafting legislation, some of these things that have been going around the country in other states, and we've looked at all, some of them are frankly just unconstitutionally vague because that they're not specific enough. And they just say, don't teach divisive concepts. Well, first, if I'm a teacher, how do I know what that means? If I'm a parent, how do I know what it means? So these guys that are actually trying to get in the weeds and craft this in such a way that it can be understood and followed, but also enforced, is really the challenge. It can't be too specific. It can't be too vague. And it is a challenge. And I'm glad they're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And so, another thing, Senator Hise, you came up with a bill specifically, pardon me, I don't know the number, but it was in 2019, and you had the foresight to understand that social emotional learning would be a thing. And in that bill, it was stipulated that parents would have to have the transparency before the concept was taught. And I believe you also included the risk surveys. The risk surveys, by the way, are a combination of CDC and DPI putting out these biannual surveys that will go to specific schools, et cetera. Well, this year, we were able to mess up their study and their sample by telling the parents ahead of time what was on those surveys. And we got there by teachers. Teachers are 30% of our coalition. Teachers are in this fight, and I want you to know that. But the point is this, is that you had the vision to do that. What happened to that bill, and who do we need to mess up?
Well,
Sloan's always ready to go to war.
Hey,
Woman after my own heart.
let me first say, in a lot of concepts, Raleigh's about as messed up as it can get. I learned this 12 years ago when I first ran for office, and they couldn't understand what marriage was. That's was coming in. People in North Carolina understood. But just when I thought it wouldn't get any crazier, then they couldn't figure out who went in which bathroom. This was coming in. ACC basketball even left the state over that concept. Now they don't even know what a woman is. This is coming in. So, giving a lot of credence to that environment that's in state government is a little difficult for me. But all this begins at a concept. When I see a scriptural directive that says to raise up a child in the way it should go, that's my directive, not go. rates that's coming in. That is not directed to government. That is directed to me as a parent. I have two 14-year-old sons, both in public schools in Mitchell County. Public schools are the tool I use to help train them up in the way they should go, to educate my children. The responsibility for education never left me and my wife. It is 100% our responsibility. There's this misconception, I think, both on the federal and the state level, of having a right to a free and basic education somehow made that government's responsibility. I think the president even said as much recently this week, that they were their children. No, my children. And so everything that's going on in the public schools is me instructing my children because they're the tools. So there is no mask or veil that is allowed in that process. I must see everything you're teaching. We'll be specific. I want to know what they're doing in math this week. I want to know what they're doing in English today. I want to know what they're doing in U.S. history. Let's not even get to the other things, sex ed and those type of things. I mean, that's really the basis of the legislation I put out there. You don't get to take my children for a couple hours and put them behind a mask and hide what you're teaching them or hide what they're dealing with. Now, you may have some disciplinary allowances in your classroom, but disciplining my children is also my responsibility. And I've told all teachers, you have a problem in the classroom, here's my phone number. You do whatever you need to, but I'm going to take care of that problem. That's what's coming in. And so that's quite literally the environment I grew up in a rural public school. But it's so much of that is collapsing, and we just surrendered. And we said, oh, well, government's job is to teach them math. I had a third grade teacher several years ago tell me not to teach my children multiplication tables because it would make them to where they couldn't do the math under Common Core for the arrays of multiplication.
I got to interject. Of course, Ralph graduated from the North Carolina School of Science and Mathematics, and he is a mathematician. So for a teacher to tell you not to teach your kids how to multiply numbers is quite something.
And we can have that argument of like, when they're doing derivatives, we're not going to be adding 7 together 7 times. I'm sorry, you'll never get through that equation in this lifetime if you don't just look at it and say those kind of things. But that same kind of thing back and forth. So my kids recently dealing with the sex ed. Obviously, we had the opt out, so I opted out. So they literally put my kids in a vacant room by themselves for an hour and a half, where they weren't allowed to talk or do anything else. Functionally, the exact equivalent of in-school suspension for the day, because it's my job to teach them about sexual education and make sure that they understand, and that the faith and other that I have are a part of that. But the school somehow thinks that it's their job, and they've got to have the right credentials, and they've got to have the right people to come in and talk about all these type of things. It just missed the basic concept. And so just what we've said in that legislation and others is quite simply, if you're going to teach it, I need to see it. And what I believe is much further than that. It's not just in these specific areas, it's everything. I want to see your lessons plans in English. I want to see your lesson plans in math. It's my job to make sure that you know that. And if you're not doing it, I've got to find something else or do it myself. Until we get that basic understanding and we really break this bondage that says it's the state's job to educate my children, and that my job is just to get them off to the door and pick them up at the end of the day. That's what's coming in. Until we break that mentality, that's why schools have this stronghold. It's because too many families and too many parents believe that we just got to meet the truancy laws. We got to get them there and not miss too many days and pick them up before there's so many days. But the point of that legislation and others, that is a mind change for education in the environment that we're currently in. And so, we're also in this environment with the governor and everything else, what's going to become law. Legislators like that bill that they start day one and they say, in 14 days, this can be signed into state law by the governor. Or if he's not going to sign it, we can override it. In the environment we're in right now, there's not many of those bills out there. The bill that says, Carolina's official color is Carolina blue, might not make it through that process, through the House and the Senate, and through the governor, and then back to the legislature. So, there's a lot of questions about expending energy on things that aren't ultimately going to get there. And then with the court system, they can ignore the law. The courts will use the fact that there's an educational right in the Constitution to make any decision they want supersede state law. Oh yes, you passed a law to do this, but the right to education is in the Constitution, therefore we're throwing out your law and putting it in. And then we have this, I know I'm rambling on, but then we have this system, nobody knows who's in control of education, because we got the State Board of Education and Superintendent's Office, the courts won't decide, so they just swing the pendulum back to whichever one the Democrats have more influence on. That's who's coming in, so if you elect to say superintendent, now the board's got all the power. If you got a governor in and you got a Democrat superintendent, we'll shift it back the other way. And if they're not, we'll just make them fight with each other to the point that they have no concept or no direction between them. But I think I answered everything.
You raised a lot more questions, though, I'll tell you that.
Good stuff. Okay, so for the purposes of saving a little bit of time, so you brought up a really important point here in that the specifics of legislation matter, and some of these concepts are hard to drill down on. I think that gets to the importance of, because we all know that you guys don't have staff, 2,000 people working for you like these government agencies might, and it's hard to craft good legislation that will withstand lawsuits. I think that gets to the importance of working with outside experts like Lindsay and Rufo to get into the specifics, so because we can come in alongside and make it a little bit more bulletproof, make it a little bit more enforceable. For instance, you can outright ban the use of the term anti-racism. You can define it as the left defines it in statute, and you can say this is a violation of Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. The government, the state government has plenary power to dictate the curriculum, under the idea of the compelling governmental interest standard in terms of dictating curriculum to children, what's harmful, what's appropriate. And then there's also no presumption of free speech in a classroom. There's a zero presumption of free speech when a teacher is in front of students on the state's time and federally funded, partially federally funded entity. So you can get specific, but this gets to, we got to put in a lot of work, and we do have to be specific. Otherwise, the left will find loopholes, the courts will find loopholes, and this is the importance of why states need to get out there, I think, and get into parental rights. And kind of outline what rights and what transparency powers the parents have. Because when we can't be specific enough, parents can circumvent or report it or to go to another school. And so there's a lot of things that we need to empower parents to do in terms of parental rights and SEL. Maybe we can come back to those subjects, but I want to get to HB2 since that's North Carolina specific and that's pertinent to these battles. I'm sorry in advance.
No problem. I've never backed away from it.
So Sloan, I'll let you kind of take that over since that's North Carolina specific.
Okay, I'm just going off the cuff here. So there's a lot of bills that we would love as an organization that represents a lot of the parents in the state to pass. Obviously, the Girls in Sports Act would be very top of the list. And then, I would love to see the Florida bill pass, something that, and I believe they title it Parental Rights and Education Act. It is not the Don't Say Gay bill. Don't say that. Don't accept their nomenclature. But I would like for it to be passed, to sixth grade. My fear, and a lot of, I think I share, at least the board members here, we've talked about this, is there going to be a lot of pushback from corporations that would stand in the way, let's say, of folks in the corner office giving the okay on getting something like that to a vote? Representative Torbett.
There has been reports, so one can assume that there will be again. It did happen during HB2, and Dan was the dominant champion of that, very supportive of that piece of legislation. What's happening, I guess, in Raleigh, and Ralph's touched on it, Dan's touched on it in DC, is that there's lunacy. There's lunacy afoot up there. There's crazy. Let me give you an example, if I could, to express exactly how crazy it actually is. I was one that drafted and offered the critical race theory bill, getting rid of critical race theory in our schools in the House of Representatives in Raleigh. It passed, and we'll say it wasn't partisan too much, but it passed. But during the debate on the floor, I was told numerous times that it didn't exist in North Carolina. The critical race theory did not exist in North Carolina. While a member of the opposition gets up, walks up to the clerk, and tells the clerk he can't vote on this bill because if he did, it would lead to a business he has that teaches critical race theory in North Carolina, so he would profit from it, so he can't vote for it.
He did a conflict of interest waiver.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that's some of the lunacy. Some of the other lunacy, you'll love this one, is that I also offered a discipline bill. We got to recapture discipline in our classroom for the benefit of our children. And in doing so, which is resting comfortably in the Senate, I might add. In doing so, I actually had folks oppose that come off and say, well, Representative, what you don't understand is that, did you know over the last 2 years, we have to have less in-home suspensions or in-school suspensions. The numbers have dropped amazingly since we got rid of that. You weren't in school! It was COVID, nobody was in school! Do you really expect me to believe this bomb? I sent a request to every LEA. LEA is the school system of your county. I want to know what I'm calling the lost kids in North Carolina. I want to know what happened to them during COVID. And I'm not through. I've got Beth Wood, the author, looking in it with me. She's doing it off the radar. God bless her. She'll find out some stuff that I probably won't be able to. But anyway, that being said, I sent a request out. I got responses from almost every LEA back. And they all came back at 1% were the folks that they just really couldn't account for. Now, every LEA said 1%. All but one. One had 12%. I don't tell you what LEA wasn't right. So I called them. I said, hey, can you help me understand the anomaly when every other system says 1%, but you say 12? 12% of your kids were missing, unaccounted for, don't have any idea where they were. No truancy laws applied, although they're on the books as general statutes. How come 12%? I said, well, I don't know. Can we look at that again? I said, sure, feel free to get back to me. So about a week later, they sent me a calculated modification to the original request. Would you care to guess at what they came in at? 1%. Hello! So then I called the superintendent and said, how did you arrive at 1%? They said, well, we really didn't understand the direction we were given, so we just put 0 across the board of questions. I mean, that's some lunacy that we're having to deal with day in and day out. We're talking about kids' lives. Who would think in our lifetime, we'd be sitting in a room today talking about evil that's taking over our education system? This is our kids. You want to talk about evil in something else, that's fine, but not in education. How in the world have we let us get down the road so far to let evil kind of take over? Science teaches us that when a void is created, something fills the void. So right now, I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, we have good and we have evil.
Yes.
And enough good has been removed and created a void that evil automatically flows right in. And we have to do everything we can. We can't do it by ourselves. We need your help. We need your support. We need your, I'll say it, we need your trust. That we're going to try to do what we can to correct this system before it's gone. And I believe it's on the road of being gone. So we have to stop it and pull it back, kicking and screaming. I don't care. But we have to pull it back to the more good that we all were brought up in by our moms and dads and churches. And those folks that built in us those American ideals that you know, God love yourself, your country, your friends and neighbors. We will not teach an education that separates us in the classroom. We will teach an education that unites us in the classroom. That's what America is all about. God love you for being here. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. So with respect to Apple, Amazon, and Google relocating part of their folks over here, this is just what I always tell our activists, or our parents, our grandparents, etc. And we have a lot of actually young Black men who have opted into this movement. And the reason for that, and they say it, I don't say it, they say it, is that they recognize that the Black community is being feminized, the male Black community, and they say, look, when we hear you say it, Sloan, when we hear you call it out, that's something we want to be a part of. So we have a lot of folks that actually don't consider themselves political. They've never been involved in the political process. And that's just fine, because I can tell you, it ain't fun. I told myself, I'm not involved in politics, but everything's political, so here we are. I guess my question is, when we look at overcoming the stranglehold these companies have on any state, look at what Disney has done to Florida. What can we do as activists to buttress that effect and that pressure on you?
And can I add to that before we get to the answering the question? So if we look at it as K through 12, they've got a hold on those institutions. Then it gets supercharged in colleges, and then HR departments in corporate America are pushing it. And then you have it being de facto enforced by government agencies. So it's a cradle to grave woke bureaucracy that's growing up. And if you're able to survive K through 12 in college and not succumb to it, then your livelihood could now be dependent on accepting these orthodoxies. And so and we may have differences of opinion on this, but it's a real challenge for Republicans who may have certain sentiments about our position on markets and what our response is to when we have basically all of corporate America now acting as the de facto enforcers of the left's agenda, and to the degree if government hasn't gotten it done yet, corporate America will then enforce it. And there's a role, and maybe we can parse this out in what we think is possible. But I would certainly suggest that if tomorrow an employer said that as a condition of employment you have to have BLM tattooed on your forehead, I think that the state would say that no, that's not that there's not such a thing as unencumbered employment power. The right of contract is not that absolute, that employees have a right. They certainly have civil rights. And so the question here, and maybe that this is a difficult question, but what can we do to stop the onslaught? And feel free to reference Disney to the degree you see fit.
And I would just like to say, Senator Hise, you put forth a tech tyranny bill, so you've got kind of the right thinking on this, where you've already said, there's going to be a limit to what we're going to accept. And so, you're already out there on the forefront of doing that. And so how do we take and extend that and make it, education-based as well?
Well, I think, even when you look at the state, I think, 2 years ago, we were probably on the path to going to all virtual servers in the state and those kind of things. But when Amazon started shutting everything down based on political data as others and not letting people access their data, that's not even a political decision. I'm not about to put the state servers somewhere where some third party says, today you don't get to access DMV data because we don't like your stance on protect the following issues. I mean, it really is about, you've got to make those motions with your feet. You've got to be conscious, just as you do with a budget for spending your funds anyway. You have to be conscious of what you're investing in. I was done with Disney a year ago when I went down there, and every mouse ear they had in there was rainbow colored in the animal kingdom. It was some particular month. So my boy's first and last trip to the Disney World and the Animal Kingdom was in the same time period. We enjoyed it. It was a great theme park, but we go to Dollywood. Don't have to worry about those things now. But that's what coming in. But you've got to be able to take yourself and make those kind of movements for what you do. When you teach people and others, let them see that you're not going there anymore specifically because of this reason. Make that education. Look, you can follow all the economics you want. And, go back to your basic economics, talk about supply and demand and everything else. I forgot to see where wokeness fit in that equation. And businesses that are making their investments and business decisions and locations on the basis of social issues will succumb to the business who make those best decisions on the basis of economic issues. I want businesses to come to North Carolina because of our workforce, because of our available supplies, because of our infrastructure, our transportation. If Amazon's making the decision not to come here for some other reason, they will succumb to the company that comes here for those economic reasons. Now, there may be a time period in that, but that is basic economics, because whoever locates here will produce goods and services cheaper and better than whoever's not coming in. That's what's coming in. And so the environment's changed right now, too. I will tell you that I talk to every employer. I'm not talking to a bunch of employees that can't find a place to work right now. I'm talking to a bunch of employers who can't find anyone to work here. And I'm talking to a bunch of people who can't find affordable housing this week coming in. So we may be, if one of these large tech companies left, I might be able to give you a lot of the economic benefits that may come from one of those large technology companies not located here.
We should never let economic hostage taking take care of the people's business in North Carolina. That just can't be done.
That's right. The other thing important is that, nature abhors that vacuum, and people get so excited about, that's probably getting in trouble, but, like Apple Company, they're bringing 3,000 jobs. They're bringing 3,000 Democrats from California is what they're doing. And, if they don't like North Carolina, don't come. That's fine. Somebody else will fill that.
There was one guy named Brett from Chatham County that I think that.
Yeah.
Let me add something, if I will, that I think has it is a cautionary tale, maybe, and I think it's because all of us are like-minded about what we're trying to do. And if you take, made mention of HB2, and I was the lead primary sponsor of HB2. There was a lot of media who, when I entered that congressional special election race, thought I was a dead man walking because I had been the lead primary sponsor of the bill that said if you're male, you go in the male bathroom. If you're female, you go in the female's bathroom. And
Would you repeat that again?
Yeah, it was amazing. It's funny. I will say, I do think I've sort of been borne out over time. If you look at Loudoun County, Virginia, but look, and we all lived that together. But think about the difference in the circumstances and how that delivered a different result than what's occurred in Florida. Now, we might all, when we're activists and we're putting pressure on officials and holding them accountable, as we should, the first thing that is required in order to make that successful is sort of I'm trying to think of the right word. It is an impetus. It is a demand. We're going to see this done. That is a necessary first step. However, there also have to be tools that can work with you to get you through to your result. Remember what happened in North Carolina. We passed HB2 in response to an ordinance out of Charlotte, and that was in 2016. I was a freshman in the House near the end of that term. We passed it in a special session. The governor signed it. All corporate power descended on the state. California said they wouldn't let people travel there. Oregon did. All of it. We faced an unrelenting denunciation by corporate media. It continued nationally in scope. It took all the oxygen out of the legislature. Couldn't pass anything else because every bit. So that was the atmosphere. And then the Republican governor lost his re-election campaign. I'm sorry. Let me say one other thing. When we passed it, we had a liberal Democrat attorney general in the state. And in that fall's election, the Republican governor lost his race. I would say that Pat McCrory lost his race in part because he tried to waffle and have it both ways. So I would have recommended he go a different direction and that he say, that's what I thought, but hell, I'm nobody. But I said, once you're in, you're in. Stand up for it. Take decide, but you understand you're standing up in front of a freight train. But stand there and defend it. Because that's what, and I think it gets back to what I said about the impetus of demand. So you got to get there. But once we had a Democratic governor and a liberal Democratic attorney general, we even had supermajorities in the legislature, so we could work our will legislatively, but the relentless assault did not stop. We didn't have a Ron DeSantis to say to Disney, look, you're not going to tell us how to run our state government. We didn't have an chief executive, to step in the breach and make that different. And so consider what we have to build before our impetus. Our demand can become results. Look at Florida. 2000, right? 2000 election. It was the place, it was the ultimate on the edge state between Republicans and Democrats. Ron DeSantis is largely responsible, but years of work by a Republican legislature to the point that Ron DeSantis ran for governor. But you're seeing, so now they have all those offices, the governor, the attorney general, the legislatures, they're all dominated by Republicans. And that is uniquely the situation you can be in. Oh, and let me say one other thing. A juggernaut of an economy. There's no question about whether Disney can pick up and leave Florida. It can't happen. So there are two states in the country that I think are in that enviable position. Texas is one and Florida is the other. And Texas is a little bit on the bubble. Texas could go the wrong way. Ron DeSantis, because of his bold leadership with the tools that have become available, has made Florida an undeniably red state. And he has become the focal point for our advance in state government in the country. Let me tell you the third state that is within a stone's throw of being in that position. North Carolina. Now, here's what has to happen to get there, because we're not there. As Ralph says, there's really no point. Whatever, Sloan, you may want those bills about women in sports, I do too. But there really is very little point in these guys bringing down upon themselves the condemnation of corporate, the corporate wokeism, unless they have the means to defeat it. That means that we have to, in 2024, this year, we must, I understand that.
Supermajority? Is that what you're saying?
If not now,
We need it.
there
We
may
need
be
it.
another step. There may be another step required. We must control the North Carolina Supreme Court because they've turned it into a separate super legislature.
Amen, yes. And we need you.
We must control it with a non-fractious Republican majority, which means empower Chief Justice Paul Newby with people who are in agreement with him and will not be fighting. Pay attention. If you don't know what I'm talking there, look into it a little more detail. So you got to get the Supreme Court. You got to get the Supreme Court. I'm not going to endorse anybody here. You got to get the Supreme Court, and then you got to use that Supreme Court to let these guys get back to exercising their constitutional power to district. And we get the hopefully super majority this time, but super majority next time. If we don't get it now, Republican.
We will get it.
I'm not going to.
We will get it.
I'm going to go ahead and say it because there won't be any doubt on the face of the earth. I've got some other people out there that I dearly love, but Mark Robinson has to be made up. And we're still not done, ladies and gentlemen. Since the Civil War, we still have never had a Republican Attorney General in North Carolina. Do not underestimate the ability of the just an Attorney General to undermine everything we're talking about. So, be demanding of your officials at all points in time. Hold them accountable. But recognize at the same time that you must set up the tools so that we can prevail against this onslaught. And once we do, then we have to go like gangbusters because we must break this control of institutions, corporate power, and the rest by the left.
Let me hit real quick on when you go back to the House Bill 2 scenario. Like we can have a lot of conversations, and the narrative was all about what left or did not come to North Carolina following House Bill 2. How shocked would you be that I told you that room rentals in North Carolina were up 5%? Travel and tourism spending the year after were up almost 6 to 7%.
Record spending that year.
Yeah, record spending in both years afterwards. See what's going on in Florida? I said to most people now, I like the Georgia model for Atlanta when everyone left over the election news and moved the baseball all-star game out. The response to that is to win the World Series. That's what's coming in. And the same is true for North Carolina. We be who we are, we be the best at who we are in the state of North Carolina. They can take anything they want. We'll show them what we have at the end of the day.
Right. Okay, well, we're almost out of time. Sloan, do you have any concluding remarks or any of the elected officials here?
I've talked too much, sorry.
I really think that conversations like this, it engenders trust in the activist class. I mean, we've been fighting on this hard, and I think that, sometimes we feel so far apart from you guys. We really do. We need love. No, I'm kidding. But we feel like we are so distant from you, and it's nice to know and to have this sort of town hall where we can kind of come together and reorient ourselves and say, yes, we are working on the same side. As you spoke about, there are limitations, right? So we have to manage our expectations, which is, as activists, it's hard for us to do because we're like, go, 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 now, right? And so, and we're new at this activism and reform. You know that we're not reformists. We've been school choicers for years. So this reformist thing is so new for us, and we're all trying to find our sea legs, if you will, right? And so how to calibrate the right activism to get the right results, to your point, at the right time with the right tools. So I want to thank you very much for all of you guys agreeing to come here and to teach us and to really kind of broker a partnership with us. And we want to do a lot more of this.
Thank you for having us. Thank you. We're trying to change a lot of narrative in education. As you know, I've got a committee now that I don't think the current system can be fixed. So I'm looking at rebuilding it from the ground up.
That sounds good to me, John.
And absolutely. And doing it right for the next 100 years. But there's one thing I want to focus on. We're changing it. I want y'all to help me. Is that we're not talking about school choice anymore. We're talking about parental choice. Okay? So we're changing the narrative away from school choice to parental choice, where it should have been all along.
The solution is simple now. Just go solve it.
Tell us what you need. I mean,
Well, you said the right word, and I think the way that I'd like to conclude it is to say what you said, the word partnership is exactly right. Need more humility among those who believe in less careerism on the part of people who often recognize we're in a cause together. And all of us need to be cause oriented. And that means we got to do everything we can not to get fed up with each other. Sloan, there have been harsh words for you from some people that, because you've been tough. And I think the answer is no, let's keep going. Let's keep
I'm a
working.
tough love kind of girl.
You are. I love tough love.
and
I
we
really
have
like that
a
too.
lot
Somebody
of-
told me I'm the most confrontational person they've ever met in their lives. And I don't mean it, and it's not in a bad way though. I mean, I think what I want to do is I want to engage. We cannot afford the alternative.
Yes.
And so a few harsh words coming back and forth would never dissuade me. And I think we all need to be in that same mindset. We got to know what our tools are, what we can work with. We got to perfect the tools that are missing. We got to keep pushing the people who have responsibility to do the right things. But the most important thing is we got to build friendships, trust, effort, together, partnership. You're heading the right way.
Sloan, if I can just conclude real quick, just hitting on something that you said, because you asked, what do we need from y'all? And, there are some things, frankly, and the last time I did a panel like this, I told this story, I'll try to make it very quick, but there are some things that we just simply can't legislate against. And it's really, rather than necessarily trying to, having that partnership here and getting that access or getting some love from, in this direction. One of the things that activists can do is to be the activist for their own kid when it's necessary, right then. And because there are some things that we can't fix. And, the story that I told when I was on a panel with Catherine Torbett and David French was that, I had an experience with this with my own son not too long ago. And he was, Black History Month, he was assigned to write a report on a Black author or activist or writer, or, take your pick of these categories. And to make a long story short, he picked Herman Cain. He went in the next day, the teacher said, well, you can't do that. He can't do that. See, he came home and said, Dad, I got to pick him over. Why? Well, the teacher said that doesn't really fit. Well, he's an author. It fits. So I sent him back there the next day and said, tell your teacher, he's an author. Here's the printout from Wikipedia. The man wrote 5 books. He counts. And the teacher said, I still don't want you to do that. He came home, told me again. I sent him back the next day and I said, well, you're going to do it. And the teacher said, well, he doesn't fit with the spirit of the assignment. And so we all know what the spirit of the assignment was, right? It was not to pick a Black conservative. It was to pick somebody where their ideology was what she wanted my son to study and parrot. Well, he wrote the paper on Herman Cain, and she gave him a 0. And believe you me, I was in there the next day, tap dancing on the principal's desk and saying, demanding something will be done about this. And to his credit, something was. But not every parent's a lawyer. Not every parent has the time to take a day off work and can go to their kid's school and harass this principal. But that is, in fact, what y'all need to do. That is where that mandate comes from, that groundswell, that support. When they know that you have eyes on them, and it's not just these guys. Because how would we legislate against that? What law could we pass to prevent that teacher's insidious racism? But even then, you get into the problem with the specifics versus the non-specifics. What really needs to be, y'all, put pressure on these schools, put pressure on these teachers. It's not all of them. It's not even close to all of them. But it takes one or two. And those, they need to know that we're watching.
And they're growing that.
Oh, and they are, in fact, no question.
And let me do this for this partnership and others. Never miss the point of praying for those who are in office. That in building these relationships and others, let your elected officials know you're praying for them. Not just the ones that kind of come over the stage, but your House member, your senator, whatever else. You can, in some ways, you can win this policy debate all day, and you're kind of missing what the war is. And so one of those things in this environment and others that I just want to say for how you do, some of these solutions are going to take supernatural methods that are coming in. It's going to take more than the right policy written on a piece of paper that might get ignored or thrown out. It's going to take the changing of hearts and minds of individuals, and that's not something government's good at. That's what's coming in, but I know what that solution is, so I appreciate it. And I always ask for me as well, but for those up here and those kind of things,